The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed as JD Vance, the Ohio senator known for his sharp rhetoric and populist appeal, took his seat at the defense table. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, calm, measured, as if he had already seen how this would unfold. At the bench sat Judge Martha Leland, a no-nonsense jurist with decades of experience. She had handled high-profile cases before, but this was different. A sitting senator accused of violating campaign finance laws was not an everyday defendant. "Mr. Vance," she began, adjusting her glasses, "you stand accused of exceeding legal contribution limits during your last campaign. The evidence against you is substantial." JD leaned forward, hands clasped. "Your Honor, I intend to present a different perspective." Leland wasn't in the mood for theatrics. "Save it for your lawyer, Senator." A smirk flickered across JD's face. "I am my lawyer." A murmur ran through the gallery. The judge blinked, momentarily thrown off. But she recovered quickly. "Very well," she said, regaining control. "Proceed, Counselor." Vance stood and buttoned his suit jacket. He walked to the center of the courtroom, exuding the confidence of a man who had navigated far tougher arenas than this. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, "this is not just a case about campaign finance. This is a case about power. About who gets to decide the rules of the game." Judge Leland sighed, already sensing a speech coming on. "Mr. Vance, we deal in facts here." "Exactly," he said, his grin widening. "And the facts are about to get very interesting." The courtroom was silent as JD Vance continued his argument. He paced slowly, making eye contact with the jury, the judge, and even the reporters scribbling furiously in the back. "The prosecution claims I violated campaign finance laws by exceeding contribution limits," he said, "but they've conveniently left out one crucial detail." Judge Leland arched an eyebrow. "And what detail is that, Mr. Vance?" He turned and gestured toward the opposing counsel. "The so-called illegal contributions were actually donations to a political action committee, an independent entity not directly controlled by my campaign. And according to precedent set in Citizens United v. FEC, such contributions, no matter their size, are perfectly legal." The prosecution shifted uncomfortably. "But Mr. Vance," the judge countered, flipping through documents, "your PAC shared staff, resources, and even a consultant with your official campaign. That suggests coordination, which is illegal." JD's smirk deepened. "That would be true if you could prove coordination. But where's the evidence? Emails? Recorded phone calls? Anything?" The prosecutor cleared his throat. You had assumptions," Vance interrupted. "But assumptions aren't evidence." A murmur spread through the room. The judge tapped her gavel twice. "Control yourself, Senator." Vance nodded but didn't sit down. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick binder. "This," he said, placing it on the defense table with a thud, "is a case file from a nearly identical situation in 2012, involving a senator from the opposing party. The FEC investigated, found no wrongdoing, and the courts dismissed the case. If the law was on their side then, it's on my side now." Judge Leland studied the binder, then looked up, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she seemed to be reassessing the man before her, not just as a senator but as a legal mind. And JD Vance knew he had her exactly where he wanted. Judge Leland turned a page in the binder, her fingers tightening slightly as she scanned the case file. The legal precedent JD Vance had presented was solid, too solid to ignore. The prosecution shifted nervously. They had built their entire argument on the assumption that Vance's PAC coordination was obvious. But now, with the senator controlling the narrative, it was clear they had miscalculated. "Mr. Vance," Leland finally said, her voice measured, "you may have found a compelling precedent, but it doesn't change the optics of this case. Voters expect transparency, and your financial maneuvers, legal or not, undermine public trust." Vance folded his arms. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is a court of law, not a political debate stage. The only thing that matters here is the law, and the law is on my side." The judge let out a slow breath. He was right, and they both knew it. But her authority was on the line. "I find that while the evidence presented does not prove unlawful coordination beyond a reasonable doubt," she began, choosing her words carefully, "there were irregularities that warrant penalties under federal ethics guidelines." JD's expression didn't change. He knew what was coming. I am imposing a fine of $50,000, she declared, as a consequence for failing to maintain clear financial separation between your campaign and associated committees. The courtroom buzzed with hushed voices. Reporters scratched furiously in their notepads. JD nodded slowly as if he had already anticipated this. Understood, Your Honor. He reached for his briefcase, pulled out a checkbook, and without hesitation began writing the check right there at the defense table. The judge frowned. Mr. Vance, you don't need to pay immediately. He tore off the check and handed it to the clerk with a smirk. I like to settle my debts quickly. A silence hung in the room. For a moment, Judge Leland just studied him. She had expected a battle. She had expected a man trying to wriggle his way out of accountability. What she hadn't expected, what the entire courtroom hadn't expected, was that J.D. Vance had played them all. She had just fined a sitting U.S. senator only to realize he had outmaneuvered the entire legal system with a single court appearance. And the worst part? She had to admit he was brilliant. As J.D. Vance stood from the defense table, a satisfied smirk still playing on his lips, the reporters in the gallery practically scrambled over each other to be the first to rush out and break the news. The senator, no, the legal strategist, had turned a public trial into a masterclass on campaign finance law, exposing the weaknesses of the prosecution and, by extension, the very system meant to regulate political money. Judge Leland, still seated at the bench, watched him carefully. Mr. Vance, she said, tapping her gavel lightly, signaling for the courtroom to settle. Before you leave, I have one final question. Vance paused, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. Of course, Your Honor. She leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. Tell me something, was this all just a show to you? J.D. tilted his head, as if weighing his response. Then, with that same measured confidence, he replied, Your Honor, the law isn't about perception. It's about precision. And I played by the rules exactly as they're written. A ripple of reactions spread through the crowd. Some saw a man who had just humiliated the system. Others saw a politician who had simply mastered it. Judge Leland exhaled through her nose. That's what I thought. Without another word, she banged her gavel and stood, walking briskly through the judge's chamber door. The moment it clicked shut, J.D. turned to his aide, who had been sitting behind him the whole time. Tell the press, he said, already striding toward the exit, that justice was served today. The aide hesitated. Sir, do you think people will see it that way? J.D. shot him a knowing look. Does it matter? With that, he pushed open the heavy courtroom doors and stepped into the blinding flash of cameras. The game was over. And once again, J.D. Vance had won. The headlines exploded within minutes. J.D. Vance outwits judge, walks away unscathed, courtroom clash ends in legal masterclass from Senator Vance, judge fines J.D. Vance, only to realize he has a brilliant legal mind. On cable news, pundits debated furiously. Some called it a stunning display of political savvy, others fumed that it exposed a broken system where the powerful could manipulate the law to their advantage. Meanwhile, in Washington, J.D. Vance's stock had never been higher. He made the prosecutors look like amateurs, one strategist marveled on a late-night panel. He didn't just beat the system, he showed the system, another analyst said grimly. And that's exactly why some people love him and others hate him. Behind closed doors, though, not everyone was celebrating. In the Department of Justice, a senior official slid a case file across a desk. Vance embarrassed a federal courtroom today, she said, her voice tight. He made a judge, a prosecutor, and the law itself look weak. That kind of thing doesn't go unanswered. Across the desk, another official picked up the file, flipping through pages of financial records, legal loopholes, and the gray areas J.D. had expertly navigated. We'll be watching him, the official murmured. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, J.D. Vance was already on to his next move. He sat in his office, scrolling through headlines on his phone, when his aide knocked on the door. The governor's office called, the aide said. They want to discuss some new legislative proposals. J.D. chuckled, setting his phone down. Of course they do. He stood, adjusting his tie. He had walked into court accused of wrongdoing, and he had walked out stronger than ever. That was the thing about playing the game better than anyone else. Once you proved you could win, the real power players started paying attention. And J.D. Vance was just getting started. J.D. Vance sat in the back of a black SUV as it cruised through Washington, D.C., the streetlights casting fleeting shadows across his face. The day had been a spectacle, but for him it was just another calculated step in a much larger plan. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Clever play today. But you made enemies. Be careful. JD smirked and locked the phone. He already knew that. The courtroom victory wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about demonstrating control. The legal system, the media, the political class, they had all watched him walk into a trap and turn it into an opportunity. He had proven that he could outmaneuver anyone, even those who believed they held the power. But now the real game was beginning. Across town, in a dimly lit office, a group of political operatives gathered around a conference table littered with folders, financial reports, and strategy memos. "This guy is dangerous," one of them muttered. "If he can spin a federal fine into a win, imagine what he'll do in an election." A woman at the head of the table nodded. "That's why we need to stop him now, before he gets any stronger." The door swung open and a senior party figure stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He placed a file on the table, thick with documents. "We're going to need something bigger than a campaign finance violation," he said. "Find it." Meanwhile, JD Vance's SUV pulled up to a discreet entrance at a well-known Georgetown club where high-powered figures met behind closed doors. As he stepped out, his aide hesitated. "Sir, are you sure about this?" After today, JD buttoned his jacket and gave a knowing glance. "I didn't win today by playing small. And I'm not about to start now." He walked through the doors into the warm glow of the club where senators, lobbyists, and power brokers turned to watch him enter. Some nodded in approval. Others in wary curiosity. Because after today, they all knew one thing for certain: JD Vance wasn't just a player in the game. He was here to rewrite the rules. JD Vance stepped into the private lounge where the air was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and whispered deals. The room was filled with men and women who understood power, not just how to win it, but how to wield it. A senator raised his glass. "Quite the performance today, JD. You made the prosecution look like law school interns." JD smirked, accepting a drink from a passing waiter. "I just read the rulebook better than they did." The group chuckled, but there was tension beneath the laughter. Some of these people admired him. Others feared him. And a few were wondering if they needed to stop him before he became truly unstoppable. A seasoned strategist leaned in. "You do realize what happens next, don't you?" JD took a slow sip, unfazed. "They dig. They look for anything: old business deals, emails, past statements. They'll try to turn me into a villain." The strategist nodded. "And when that doesn't work?" JD set his glass down. "Then they try something else. Something bigger." Silence hung over the table. Everyone in this room had seen what happened to rising stars who became too powerful too quickly. The system didn't like wild cards. JD knew they would come for him. The only question was when. His aide appeared at his side, slipping him a note. JD unfolded it and read the single line. "They're moving." He exhaled through his nose, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Of course they were. JD pushed his chair back and stood. The room went quiet. "Gentlemen," he said, "I appreciate the drinks, but I have work to do." A senator scoffed. "Work? You just won the biggest legal battle of your career." JD buttoned his jacket and looked around. "This wasn't the battle," he said. "It was just the opening move." Then, without another word, he strode out of the room, leaving behind the quiet murmurs of men who realized they weren't sure whether they were watching the rise of a political mastermind or the beginning of something far more dangerous. Either way, one thing was certain: JD Vance wasn't just playing the game. He was playing to win.